Hello everybody, I'm Yago Gustafsson. I'm a German chess grandmaster and I would like to welcome you to my new video series, or I should probably say mini-series. It's a reasonably short series about how to deal with the four knights from the black perspective. The four knights I call the position occurring after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight to c3, and knight to f6. Here's white to move, and depending on white's next move, the game can take on a very different character. The main line in my eyes is the so-called Scottish Four Knights d4, e takes d4, knight takes d4, which is very solid, where I hope I can give you a reasonably current, sharp and interesting idea to neutralize that one. And then there is the Spanish Four Knights, based on bishop to b5, where once again I decided to play in the sharpest and most principled way. I believe the status here is pretty fine for play. And frankly, the Spanish Four Knights is the main reason I did this video series, because we recently published a video series by Laurent Fressinet on the Berlin, which I thought was very good. And I told him, don't worry about knight c3 here. I will cover the four knights eventually. So I thought, might as well get it out of the way, get it done. And this position already shows you that this four knight stuff can be found via many different move orders. Even if you're a Petrov player, after knight f6, knight c3, chances are knight c6 is the best move. You still need to know about this. Doesn't matter if you're a Marshall player, a Berlin player, a Petrov player. Any e4, e5 player has to think about what to do in the four knights, and I hope in this video series I can give you the tools to deal with it, both with bishop b5, with pawn to d4, and with all the sidelines, a3, g3, h3, bishop c4, you name them. I've covered all that I could think of. I hope you guys enjoyed the series, and I'll see you with the heavy lifting in video number 1. Hello everybody, let's jump straight into the action and start studying one of the most annoying lines you can meet on a regular basis as an e4, e5 player. I am talking about the infamous, is it infamous? Probably not. About the very solid Scottish Four Knights, I believe that's what it's called. It occurs after knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, knight to f6, and pawn to d4. It does lead to a very different type of play than other fourth moves here that we will look at later, like bishop to b5. And it can be reached via a couple different move orders. So it's relevant for you even if your repertoire is, let's say, the Petrov. Still very possible that people will start playing knight to c3. And if you don't want to mess around here with bishop to b4, but play the move knight to c6, you have to be ready for the four knights. It could also be relevant for you if your opponent plays the Scotch. Is it Scotch or Scottish? I keep getting it wrong. I think it's Scottish. Oh, it's the Scotch game. We will never know. d4. E takes d4. Knight takes d4. If your move here is knight f6, which is a move that I am planning to recommend in a future video series, then after knight to c3, we're right back into our territory. The good old four knights d4 line. Why do I think this is such an annoying line? It's not because it's so strong. It actually is not very difficult to equalize against it. The problem is that it's very difficult to unbalance the game. So sometimes if you're black against a weaker rated opponent, lower rated opponent, or if you're black in a must-win situation and you smell the four knights coming, it will make you feel a bit uneasy. And it's hard to shake that feeling. And to be completely honest with you, this video will not cure that. The four knights is a very, very solid line. And if you're in a complete must-win situation, things are tough. And if you feel your opponent could do that, you might have to consider c5, c6, g6, which is probably not what you want to hear, but I'm trying to give you my honest opinion. However, what I will give you in this video is a solid yet surprising and sharpish, at least sharpish looking repertoire for black that I think will solve all the problems and could maybe put white under some pressure if he's not familiar with it. First of all, let's have a look at this position after 4d4 and at our options. Some people toy around with the immediate bishop to b4, but whenever I studied it, I could see nothing but potential trouble after knight takes e5 and very little upside, so I've never been a fan. We have to go e takes d4. Knight takes d4 is what they do. We'll look at knight d5, the Belgrade gambit, in our sidelines odds and end video, but you should only dream of white going knight d5. So knight takes d4, and this is another mini crossroads where some people, in order to keep the game more complex, play the move bishop c5 here. I've never liked that move. White has a choice between knight takes c6 and the move that bothers me more, bishop to e3, when objectively I think white is just better after bishop to b6, queen to d2, tending long castles. Granted, this would lead to a sharper game, but I could never really make it work, so I'm not going to recommend it in a video series. However, keep it in mind that this option exists should you ever be in one of these must-win spots. At least it's hard for white to... I was going to say to force equality, but that's not really true. White has a bunch of options here, knight f5, very solid. So bishop c5, never been a fan. That leads us to by far the most logical and by far the main move, the move I recommend here. Bishop to b4. Pinning, developing, attacking the pawn on e4, preparing short castles. It's doing everything you could ask from one move, really. White only has one decent reply. The problem is your Four Knights aficionados will blitz that out. I've played this position, including blitz, at least hundreds of times. And I've never seen anybody do anything else but knight takes c6, b takes c, bishop to d3. If they do, you should be very happy. For example, f3 is a move we love to see, castles followed by d5. And the white position is already crumbling, but don't think you will very often. Same could be said about bishop to g5, trying to keep the tension. Not a bad move. Black just goes h6, and white won't be able to keep his construction up. So what they do is take b takes c. We don't want that endgame. And bishop to d3 is the only sensible move, and also the move that you will invariably face. Queen d4 or whatever, queen d7, just doesn't make any sense. Bishop e2 is a move people will not blitz out against you very often either. Just castle black is fine. So bishop d3 is what they do. And now black typically plays d5 either here or on the next move. And the position we usually get via one move order or another is d5, e takes d, castles and castles. This at least is the position I'm always getting, and that, or almost always getting, and that the white players seem to aim for. What they do want is to play this position after c takes d5. And now they will argue, okay, I understand I'm not better. That's very easy for me to play. I can play either the line with bishop g5, you play c6, I go queen f3, then I put my rooks in the middle of the board, play h3, shuffle my knights somewhere to e2 or to a4, play c4, and I will never be under any pressure. Which is more or less true. I'm not saying these positions are dead draws, but I am saying they are equal and somewhat easier to play for white. So if you're the stronger player, it can sometimes still be tough to make anything happen here, because white doesn't face many challenges or decisions from a structural viewpoint. From a theoretical viewpoint, I should add that instead of bishop g5 recently, white has been trying to refine that stuff a bit by first going h3 or first going queen f3, keeping this bishop's future open. It could go to g5, but it could also go to f4 in one go, which is sometimes useful. You get lines like c6, queen f3, bishop d6, bishop to f4. Well, once again, white is not really better. Like any computer will yell 0-0 at you after pretty much any move in these positions. Bishop e6, queen c7, rook b8, whatever. But You have to go bishop e6 to play rook b8. But anyway, computers aren't scared of this, but it's so hard to pose any problems with black. That's my issue. Therefore, I have always looked for a way to avoid these lines. And recently, I've seen one that was introduced into practice by the very strong Indian grandmaster and theoretician Vidit. He went d5, e takes d, castles. When, by the way, I've played this many times. No one has ever taken the pawn on c6 against me. But you should have at least some rudimentary knowledge of what to do against that. D takes c6. White players just won't do this. Leaves the king in the center, leads to a sharp position, goes against their overall strategy. And different things work for black. Rook a8 check is fine. But the move I like best is to go bishop g4. Remember that move. Just attacking the queen and trying to force white to go f3. Here, white could lose very quickly if he were to play a move like bishop e2 after queen e8. Everything falls apart already. Check it. So f3 is probably the best. But after rook to e8 check, once again, the white construction is under a lot of stress. The best move is king to f1. Because bishop e2, I think, runs into knight d5 with some very annoying tactics already. Let's say f takes g. Knight takes c3. Won't end well. So white has to go king f1. And here after bishop to e6. Well, he's 2 pawns up, but he won't get to enjoy them very much with his king stranded on f1. So yeah, don't expect to ever get that position. There's some other lines. Queen d2, rook e8 check, and here king f1. But once again, black just has excellent compensation. You can play very directly if you chose to with knight e4, which forces pieces of the board and an equal endgame after bishop e4, bishop c3. Or you can just play for compensation with a move like a5. So once again, white won't be a very happy camper with his king in the middle of the board. If you don't like any of this, you could go for the other move order as well. Start with castles and then meet castles with d5. But I prefer the immediate d5. Gives white somewhat fewer options like castles, d5. You could discuss. More like this makes any sense. Not a whole lot, but you could discuss. So I recommend d5, e takes d, castles. I promised everyone will castle here. And now we do not play c takes d. But once again, we play bishop to g4. This is the big new trend introduced by Vidit, I believe against Wei Yi in the year 2018. It hasn't been very long. This line has only been around for less than a year, but it's already gained the attention of many strong grandmasters. There's quite some games played in 2018, 2019 in the database. And yeah, as far as I can see, the move is just fine for black. The only problem is, once again, black is not better. And a bunch of lines here lead to positions where black's winning chances are very, very limited. So it is a very modern line. We play concretely. We ask some questions, and if white answers them correctly, we equalize with black, but white hasn't committed enough sins that we could be better here against perfect play. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's look at the critical lines. The most critical move, of course, is attacking this bishop, because if it doesn't get attacked, black can, at the very least, take his pawn back, and he's made an active developing move. So f3 is what we have to start with. The bishop goes to h5, and now what has black gained for not recapturing? Mainly weakening the dark squares around the white king, and concretely that means that after d takes c6, we can give a check on d4. White goes king h1, and now we recapture first one pawn on c3, and then the next pawn, because the queen from c3 is attacking both a1 and c6. The price we had to pay for this is the two bishops. White currently does have the two bishops. But if we look at the position, it turns out But this bishop probably will not stick around for very long. After bishop g6, it will get exchanged. And this position is just equal. The white king is arguably slightly weaker than the black king due to f3. So not much to know or be worried about here. For example, bishop f4, we take the pawn. Computer gives us weird move, queen to e2, maybe hinting at some bishop b5 somewhere. But after just knight d5, covering this pawn just in case, let's say bishop g3, bishop g6. I couldn't see any problems for black, it's just equal. So that's one line. Of course you can make other moves here, rook b1, bishop g5 and whatnot. But the position remains equal. Black reclaims his pawn. And now let's look at a more ambitious attempt for white. Because he could think, okay, in that line you equalize because of the check on g4, on d4. But what if I take that check away? If I go g4, first of all, somewhat weakening, but it does have an idea. Bishop to g6 takes h takes g, and now d takes c6, and haha, you cannot check me. That is true, and white is 2 pawns up. But the good news from black's point of view is after bishop takes c3. First of all, these extra 2 pawns will be part of a triple c pawn, the Irish pawn center. And secondly, they probably won't stick around for very long. White has a choice here. He can go for the endgame. Queen takes, rook takes, b takes c3. But after rook d6, we just start snacking on the c file. And once again, this position is just equal because the c6 and the c3 pawn are not gonna stay for very long on this little board of ours, for example. Something like this. Égalité. This is probably what most white players would do if they choose to keep queens on the board with b takes c. Queen e7 is fine, but queen e8 might be even finer, a little more subtle, attacking the pawn on c6, capitalizing on the fact that after bishop a3, we have the Zwischenschach, queen e3 check, king somewhere, followed by rook fd8. And all of a sudden, white has to be very, very careful already. For example, queen e1, queen b6. And this king might very well start feeling the heat. So we can conclude g4 does not bother us either. Last move we have to know in this position is a move that has been played in Grandmaster practice as well. It's not an attempt to grab pawns immediately, but instead it's an attempt to develop pieces very quickly, to play bishop g5 and now after c takes d5, to cause some tactical problems, either by bishop takes f6 or by the more cunning direct knight takes d5. Let's start with bishop f6, queen f6, knight takes d5 is the point. We take on b2, reclaim the pawn. The only way for white to ask any questions here is to play rook b1. Now, like once again, cashes in on f3, gives this little Zwischenschach on c5, king h1, queen goes back to e5, covers c7. Now, if white were to play slowly, he can easily end up worse here. Bishop d6 is looming, but white does have this little trick to play f4. Attack our queen and transpose to an endgame. That turns out to be equal after bishop d1, fe, bishop g4, knight takes c7. Oops. Rook a to c8. You can ask your computer. This is just fine for white. He does have bishops. The white pawns are slightly weakened. So you could continue the lines a little further. But it's nothing that white players should be all that excited about. Therefore, bishop f6, queen f6 does not exactly scare us either. And the last move I should mention is a move that has been played in a recent, I keep forgetting who against whom it was, but in a recent high-profile game between 2 Russian grandmasters. It's the fake sacrifice, knight takes d5, giving up a piece, but there are some tactics connected to it. We, of course, take the knight, queen d5, bishop f6. We see the first point is that gf bishop h7 would be bad news. So what do we do? think about it. Bishop f6. We once again use Mr. f3 to give a check. We go queen c5 check. And after king h1. Now there is no more hanging queens on d5, so black is in time to go g takes f6. Black is a piece up, so why would white go for this? The reason is that white has some tactics that will reclaim the bishop. You go a3 here, and this bishop is caught in, well, not on the middle of the board, but still sort of a surprising pattern that this regains the bishop. Doesn't really matter. There's two moves here. If you want to continue the game, you could and should play the move a5, a takes b, when black's space advantage compensates for a somewhat weaker king. It is one of these 0-0 positions where if anybody has to be slightly careful, it's white, but it's of course equal. If you want to force a draw, you can play like in the game. I keep referencing but forgetting who it was, and play bishop to a5. Pawn to b4. Takes. Rook to a6. What is not worse here? Queen a1 is coming. This pawn is hanging. This pawn is weak. But it is pretty much a forced draw, which I will briefly show you, just for completeness. I think this is how it goes. And it is time to shake hands. Just don't get checkmated here after h5. There's still time to take, but you could also just throw in h6. Hard to lose such a position. Either color. So, I hope there wasn't too much theory. I think it's quite manageable. You go bishop g4 and bishop h5. Bishop g5, cd5. There is one or two lines you have to calculate, but they're not that tough. And these g4s, d takes c6. Don't really scare us off either. So, to complete our bishop g4 coverage, let's briefly look at other moves here for white. f3 is not forced. You can break this attack in two other sensible ways. One is bishop to e2. We take, and knight takes e2. When here black, if he chose to, he could play some deep move like rook to e8. But I see nothing particularly wrong with just recapturing here either. When we get the usual structure, but this time with the light square bishops already exchanged, which should be some sort of progress for black. So yeah, the position remains equal, but absolutely nothing to worry about after bishop g5. Any move is fine. c6 is fine. Rook to b8 is fine, trying to come here. I think as my main line, I had this move rook to e8, even though, as mentioned, anything is fine. My main line was rook e8, knight to d4, and bishop to d6. When here we're hinting at some bishop h2, knight g4 ideas after a careless move by queen d3. While after queen f3, we go bishop e5. We want to go here or here. And the position once again is equal, because after knight c6, there is a little trick that I might already touched upon in a different version. This time it's the knight that falls. So bishop e2 is pretty harmless. I think the most critical move actually is the clumsy looking knight to e2. This looks very silly because after c takes d5, it's clear black has achieved something. But now at least white has gotten his knight, which was slightly misplaced, on c3 out of the way. And after c takes d5, he can try to push his c-pawn to c4, trying to cause at least some damage to the black structure. Probably smartest to start with h3, pushing this bishop to h5, and now go c4. And these positions, I've checked them a bit, they're equal. But at least play continues. You could see a scenario where white gets some pressure here if he manages to consolidate by going queen c2, knight somewhere, maybe take on d5 at the right moment. So this is a playable line, but I do not think there's any cause for concern for black. Black could just take here, but I like the somewhat more subtle rook e8, just keeping the tension. when one typical line would go something like queen to c2, unpinning, black goes bishop to g6, takes, let's say a3, bishop back to d6, c takes d5, knight takes d5. I kept getting these types of positions where white has this slightly better structure because his apologies, because his pawns are connected while the black pawns are isolated. But black, you could argue, has a slightly better minor pieces. The bishop on t6 is very nice. Knight on d5 is centralized. And these positions are equal. If you switch on computers here, you will normally become direct and sharp very quickly. Something like rook d1, c6, and if takes, rook takes e2 is a trick. Tending, queen takes d5. Little tactics exercise. Pause the video. How does black get a bad position here? Congratulations if you've spotted rook e1, bishop h2. Boom. Obviously not forced, but just to show some ideas in this position. Computer line was something like knight d4, queen f6, knight f3, bishop f4, equal. So yeah, there are alternatives along the way after c4, rook e8. There's also the move c takes d5, but the type of position I was getting kept being very, very similar to what we just saw. Like so yeah, I think knight e2, if any white players are watching that really want to use this Scotch Four Knights to play for a win, I believe this move is your best bet. But the good news for black players is black is not worse and has reasonably easy play. cd, rook e8. Recapture on d5 with the knight. Put the bishop on d6. Do not worry. So that, I believe, is already all you need to know to play against the main line after d5, e takes d, castles, short castles, bishop to g4. Is, yeah, a modern approach trying to put pressure on the white position, not even allowing him to develop without making a concession. And as far as I can tell, it just works and leads to equality. Not more than that, but you could at least try to catch the occasional white player off guard who was happily thinking about blitzing our bishop g5, queen f3, h3, rook d1, knight e2, c4, and offer a draw. Bishop g4 will maybe pose him some fresh problems. There's one more line that I should tell you about for completeness sake. Maybe two more lines. I don't know. After d5, 99% of white players, I believe, go e takes d5 here. If they were to play e5, you should know that the correct move is knight to g4 here, targeting this pawn and also keeping an eye on some other soft spots in the white position. After castles, black castles, once again, attacking this guy. f6 is looming. f4 doesn't really work because after bishop c5, king h1. There's multiple ways to roam. Queen h4 is pretty good. h3, queen g3. Not sure why I'm showing this. It's not exactly theoretically relevant. That's pleasant. Okay, checkmate. So e5 bad because of knight g4. One move that has been played a bit recently is bishop to d2, trying to keep the tension, lure black into taking a not really poisoned but somewhat hot pawn on e4. The good news is, if black just develops, he doesn't have much to fear here. Short castles, short castles. There's many playable moves. The one I recommend is to play rook to b8. Just, keeping an eye on the b2 pawn and also anticipating typical trick white has with his bishop on d2 here. Let's say we play h6. We would have to think about knight takes d5. Typical small tactic. Bishop d2, knight f6, Zwischenschach. C takes d, bishop b4, knight d5, ed. Could be somewhat unpleasant. And rook to b8, of course, stops all that by defending the bishop on b4. If this bishop gets challenged now with a3, it can just go to a better square, like bishop d6. The rook, once again, forms a good role, targeting the b2 pawn immediately. White normally plays rook e1 here, keeping the tension, and we should do the same. Go rook to e8, saying, if you keep doing this, one day I might take on e4. or on c3 and e4. I believe the main move I've seen played here is the move pawn to h3, stopping any bishop g4 shenanigans, but this is already allowing us, if we wanted to force the issue and at the very least equalize, even ask some questions. If we don't want to force anything, we can also play h6 and just keep the tension. However, black can equalize here by going d takes e4. Point being, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes b4, forced. Here, next little tactics exercise. Desperado. What do? Knight takes f2. There you go. Rook e8, queen e8. The only way to keep the balance for white, or more or less, seems to be something like queen to e1. But that's not what you want with white out of the opening. Fighting for a draw going on here. So, bishop d2, nothing to be scared about. Castles, rook b8, oops, rook b8, followed by rook e8, and then have a look around. I believe that is all you need to know to battle against the Scotch Four Knights, hopefully successfully, but the usual disclaimer that it is very tough against a booked up white player that wants to simplify the game or just get an easy game to get winning chances here. And I have not really managed to solve that riddle. If there is a solution, one line I should briefly mention as an alternative. If you don't want to simplify the structure, you could go for castles, rook to e8 here, which is a line that Levon Aronian has toyed with a bit, trying to keep more tension in the position. I never liked it that much. First of all, I think after bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, we have to go for sharp stuff with g5 and grabbing this pawn, which works for black, but white is not really under pressure. The lines are quite tricky to play, like queen h5, you have to play d6 and often go bishop f5, leaving this pawn on prise, queen h6, bishop f5 anyway. So this is okay, but not sure it has that much upside. And what bothers me even more is that after queen f3, I still don't know what to do. d5, we haven't achieved much. Aronian has toyed with bishop to d6, tending to go bishop e5 and then d5 or d6 according to circumstances. But also here after bishop d6, bishop f4, queen f4. I never liked the black position that much. Still, if you want to keep some tension, this is not too bad either. You can play d6 here and say, okay, you know what? No fixed structure for you. Still, my recommendation is to meet bishop d3 with d5, e takes d, short castle, and here to play bishop to g4. Hopefully has some surprise value and seems like a reasonably simple and direct way to solve all of black's problems. Thanks for watching. I hope you're armed against the Four Knights. Don't worry, I have not forgotten the Belgrade Gambit. We'll talk about that in a later odds and ends or sidelines or whatever video. But for now, in the next video, we will tackle more serious business.